Hi guys, and welcome to Walking with Anxiety podcast. My name is Stephen Dawes. Thank you for joining me as always. Now, just to let you know that obviously, hopefully these episodes are going to be becoming more frequent now that I've got my new laptop. It's a new Chromebook, which I've been really impressed with actually. And I've had a few ideas about the differences between the Chromebook and my previous laptop, which is Windows PC, which I've always used really Windows from the beginning. So I thought that it might be a good idea to tell a few people about the differences between a Chromebook and a Windows laptop. So on my other channel, which is the Stephen Dawes Geek Show, which you can find on Anchor, I will be describing some of the differences, and also on my YouTube channel of the same name, the Stephen Dawes Geek Show, you will also be able to see me using the Chromebook, and I'll describe the differences that you can get between the two. So hopefully that will help people who maybe are thinking about getting a Chromebook or are switching to a Chromebook for the first time and want to know what the differences might be between the two. So if you find that interesting, hop on over there and give that a go, and let me know what you think. Please let me know how you think has it helped you or has it not. So then I can go forward and do other stuff or just leave it all alone, whatever. So today, what I wanted to talk about was something that I hadn't really heard about until a few days ago, and that was a link, or a link, suspected link. I think it is actually a link that's been proven, between streptococcal infections and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders. Now, this is something that I hadn't really thought about before. I hadn't even heard about it, and I read an article that discussed the implications of the streptococcal infection, and it links to OCD. And I hadn't really thought about it before. And then as I was reading, I heard about PANDAS, which is the Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder Association, apparently, with streptococcal infections. That's what PANDAS means. So I probably won't be repeating that again, because took all my energy just to say it that one time. So I hadn't heard of PANDAS either, and it's really interesting that they have this link between the two, and it's fascinating to hear about why the streptococcal infection does play a part in OCD, or can play a part in OCD. Now obviously they're not saying, I don't think, that everyone who has OCD has had a streptococcal infection, but there is research to say that it does sometimes cause these problems. So I found it quite interesting. I thought that I would give you the heads up and let you know about it, because I hadn't heard of it, and so maybe other people out there haven't heard about it either. You maybe find that this could be something that relates to you, or maybe to your children. So I'm going to give it a try to explain it the best way that I can. And the reference I'm using is the National Institute of Mental Health, because they've got quite a good article on it, so I'm going to be referencing some of the stuff from there as well, and I'll leave a link to the National Institute of Mental Health on the description to the podcast, so that you can click on it and have a read through it yourself at your leisure as well. So as I say, PANDAS, which is this acronym for that, what I just said just now, is thought to be an obsessive compulsive disorder, or a tic disorder, or both, that might appear suddenly following a streptococcal, or as they commonly call it, a strep infection. And this could be a throat infection or scarlet fever, something like that. And these symptoms of OCD, or the tic symptoms, can become worse following a strep infection. So if they have had them before and they get a strep infection, it can be made worse by the infection. Now, one of the things they talk about in particular is the fact that a lot of this happens out overnight. So they'll have the infection in their throat or the scarlet fever, and then almost overnight they will start to develop OCD or a tic or something like this. It could be motor or vocal tics, or both. It could be obsessions, compulsions, or both. Could develop just overnight after they've had this type of infection. And it can make children moody, irritable, have anxiety attacks, and have separation issues with their parents and loved ones, which is something that I know a lot of people do suffer from, and a lot of people have children that suffer from that thing as well. Now, strep is quite an old organism. It's been around for a long, long time, and what it does is it mimics the body's own cells, if you like, so that the immune system doesn't see it. And what it does is it can mimic many different cells within the body. So it could be the skin, it could be the joints, the heart, it could be brain tissue. And it's the brain tissue that they think is what could be causing the problems with OCD and tics and things like this, because although this strep infection is very good at mimicking the body's own cells and hiding from detection, eventually the body's immune system does find it and starts to attack it. But the problem then is that because they are mimicking so closely other body cells, the immune system can't tell the difference. So it starts to attack the streptococcal cells and also its own cells that it thinks is streptococcal cells, if that makes sense. And this is where the issues become apparent, because if this is dealing with brain tissue and brain cells, then it could be destroying or damaging areas of the brain, causing OCD, tics, and etc. Now, obviously, this is quite a technical situation, and I'm trying to explain it the best way that I can in a kind of layman's terms. But it's something that they have looked at, and they found that this actually is something that happens. The streptococcal infection gets into the body, and then the body tries to fight it and ends up killing off some of its own cells to try and cure the strep infection. Now, obviously, if you have signs of scarlet fever, or if you have something like a throat infection, then you will be using antibiotics as well, maybe to fight off that infection. But obviously, the longer that the immune system is fighting, perhaps the more cells it's going to kill off and the more damage it's going to do. So this is something that is known to happen, and it's something that I hadn't really, as I said before, I hadn't even known that this was happening, and it really surprised me when I read about it the other day, that this whole thing has actually been researched and is known about, and I didn't even know about it. Now, I'm not entirely sure. I have had throat infections. I don't think I've had scarlet fever in my life, but I have had throat infections. So it could be something that's happened to me, because I have OCD. It could have happened to me when I was a kid, and I didn't even know about it. I'm not sure when this research was done, but it just seems really interesting that they found this link between the two. Now, before you get too concerned, obviously it is something you need to think about. However, it's mainly a pediatric disorder, so it tends to affect children from around 3 to puberty. So, and they think that although it can happen in teenagers, or it is possible that it could happen in teenagers, it seems to be something that is quite restricted to the younger age group. So it's unlikely that adults or teenagers, older teenagers, are going to be affected by this. Certainly if you've got a young child, between 3 and puberty, or between 3 and 12 years old, and they develop scarlet fever or they develop a throat infection, it's very important, I think, that you get medical help from your doctor so that the risks of this is minimised. I think the best thing to do. And of course there are many. How would they diagnose pandas? Well, there's many ways that they can do it, but they tend to look for a certain set of criteria. So it could be obviously the presence of OCD or a tics disorder. They would also look at the age of the symptoms when they started happening. They would also look at if they've had any type of bacterial infection, so something like a throat infection, or if they've had scarlet fever, or they've had a history of scarlet fever. They would also look at neurological anomalies such as physical hyperactivity or unusual jerky movements that aren't part of the child's normal control, and how often or when they started to become a problem. You know, were they very quickly onset very quickly, or did it happen over a long period of time? If it's a very quick onset, then it's more likely going to be something that's caused by this strep infection, as I mentioned earlier. Now, as I said before, the usual treatment for things like a throat infection or something like that is antibiotics, and generally that's what they do. Although, you know, in many countries now they are trying to minimise the use of antibiotics because they don't want people to become resilient to it, because obviously the number of antibiotics that are now unusable are gaining every time people have them, because they get immune to them, or the bacteria or the infections get used to them, and then they're useless basically. So they're trying to cut down as much as they can, but it could be in certain situations like this that they will do that. And another reason that they might want to do it is if they've done a throat culture, or they've done some kind of culture to find out what kind of bacteria it is, and if it is a strep bacteria, then they may well look at it and say, well, okay, we need to go in with antibiotics to kill this off because of the risks of something like OCD or tics or other issues because of this cell mimicking situation. So there are lots of things to think about, and obviously it's very important that if your child, for example, has something like that, or shows symptoms of a throat infection or scarlet fever, that you take them to the doctor and maybe just give them an idea about this. Just say to them, I've heard about this, I've read about this in the National Institute of Mental Health. Is it something I need to be concerned about? Now, obviously, it is something that doctors and things will know because it's in the medical profession. but it could be something they may not consider. So it's worth, if you are worried about it, just bringing it up to them. Or if you've noticed that after your child's had an infection they develop this OCD or a tic or something like that, it could be worth telling your doctor about it, obviously, because then they can find out if it was caused by the strep bacteria, and there are tests they can do to find out if that was the case. Obviously, things are going to happen, bacteria and infections are going to happen, and there's not really much that you can do about it. But hopefully, by telling you about this, it gives you a little bit of a heads up and something to be aware of if that happens. Obviously, I don't want to worry people and say this is a big problem, but it's just something to be aware of and something that you can look out for your children in the future. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say today. I hope that you've enjoyed the episode. I hope that you found it informative and interesting. And if you have, please let me know. You can contact me on Twitter at Walking with Anxiety, that's ANXI at the end, or you can get hold of me on Instagram, Walking with Anxiety, as well. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, as I said before, and I'll see you next week. Until then, bye bye.